refuses to call Sean Hannity, Sean Hannity. Nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity, Sean Hannity. Nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean Hannity. Everybody refuses to call Sean Hannity, Sean Hannity. Nobody calls Sean Hannity. I said the war's a stupid thing. If somebody would call Sean Hannity, I spoke to Sean.
And this is the Fourth Branch Project, the first and only program which is dedicated exclusively to those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Welcome to the Fourth Branch Program. Glad you can make it. I am MD. This program is dedicated exclusively for those with common sense, a spirit of patriotism, and a determination for a more perfect union. Stay tuned as we begin the discussion of a very important, interesting, and enlightening topic. Hope to hear from you soon. Happy listening.
Hello everyone, I am MD and this is the Fourth Branch program. Welcome. Since January 20th, 2017, the country has been going through very tumultuous times. We say that America is in crisis. Of course, it is very easy to point finger to a very important individual, the President of the United States. Indeed, since January 20th, Mr. Trump has been causing uproar in the country. Democrats point fingers to Mr. Trump for disturbing every aspect of the way of life in our nation. Republicans, who were in full control of both houses, simply shrug it off. It's the prerogative of the president, they said, and there is absolutely nothing anybody could do about that. Now, one would be very naive to believe that someone like Donald Trump, an inexperienced individual, very incompetent, could possibly cause that kind of damage, that kind of chaos to the country. I started to talk yesterday about this very fact. Donald Trump is not smart enough. We know that. If we remove, for instance, for just 1 second, the ability for Donald Trump to tweet. If there were no Twitter, Donald Trump would have been the most silent president in the history of the country because he doesn't know how to express himself. He doesn't have the vocabulary. He doesn't have any way of communicating. Even when his speechwriter writes something for him to say, he usually goes off script, and we see the kind of damage he can do because he simply doesn't have the principle. And yet, our country has been going down a path that no one can recognize. Who is causing that? Today, we will continue the discussion and show that this problem that the country has been going through is not the making of Donald Trump. Yes, Donald Trump has exacerbated the problem. Donald Trump has certainly contributed to the problem. In fact, Donald Trump has exploited the problem, but he didn't create it. Donald Trump is just a straw man. As I mentioned, Donald Trump is not smart enough to cause any of the things that we've been complaining about. We, the people, have been complaining about gridlock in Washington for many decades now. Donald Trump was just a private citizen doing whatever he was doing, declaring bankruptcy most likely. Today, gleefully, members of a political party enjoy the idea of just dumping all the blame on Donald Trump. But as mentioned, Donald Trump could not possibly concoct anything that we've seen so far. In his private business, Donald Trump did not succeed as he suggested. Most of everything of wealth that Donald Trump has accumulated has been done through very illegitimate, illegal ways. And we are seeing that now just under our eyes. The movie is still ongoing. And yet, we all continue to point finger to someone who is just as innocent as those who are victimized by what he's doing. Today, we will show you the difference between politics and deception. Of course, we will continue the conversation about race relations in America, another very important topic which impacts our way of life, especially for minority, for blacks in the country. Stay with us. Yesterday, we left you discussing slavery, the rebellion. Now, we talk a lot about race relation in America, especially at times that there is a tragedy. Whenever a black individual falls victims of police brutality or police execution, all the networks talk about one thing and one thing only: race relation, how we should start talking to each other in order to understand one another. Ironic, isn't it? And given a few days, everything goes back to normal until the next tragedy, which gives rise to this program, War on Blacks. As you will see very shortly, War on Blacks is not for sensationalism, but rather a way of pointing out what has been going in the black community. Casualties, physical casualties, emotional casualties, psychological casualties, and yes, financial casualties, all caused by what has been a predicament that blacks had no say over, and yet in the midst of the 21st century, we are still coping with the aftermath of what had happened a couple of centuries ago. We will be right back to continue the conversation about slavery, a bloody rebellion. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Once again, thank you for joining and thank you for being with us today. If you are here for the first time, if you're watching this for the first time, let me set the stage straight so that there is absolutely no misunderstanding as to where we're going with this program. One, we already acknowledge that there are two very distinct groups of whites in the nation. There are millions of whites who are racist and who discriminate. There are millions of other whites who are not racist, who do not discriminate. Second, we also understand that everyone who watches today or in replay of this program were not around during slavery. Slavery ended in 1865, so I doubt very much that any such individual is still alive. So those two are very important aspects that we set as a basis while we're discussing race relation and we're taking a look back at slavery and discussing all the different aspects of what transpired, what has caused the remnant of the vestiges of slavery to continue to haunt us all today, up to today. Now, there was at some point during in the period of slavery, there was at some point that first let me say that no individual, and this is almost exclusively for those who continue to peddle the idea that blacks could have gotten out of slavery as if they had a choice. They just, for some unknown reason, for some mysterious reason, they decided to stay slave. In fact, a number of people who have chimed in, a number of people who have commented about this, seems to suggest that it took blacks so long to get out of slavery because that was a choice, as if they had the possibility of escaping, they had the possibility of ending slavery, but because they enjoyed it so much, so they stay slave. That's not the case. And if you watch any of the previous presentation that I made, especially in the introduction, you'll find out that blacks were subjected to the most inhuman treatment that today, if you were to inflict on animals, those individuals would have been thrown in jail for a very long time. So there is no possibility of any argument for anyone to suggest that blacks somehow decided to, enjoy those treatment. No such thing. It's only people who do not know what they're talking about, people who do not know history, or people who do not care, or I would say maybe racist, who would advance such statement. I already mentioned some of those inhuman treatment that white slave owners were inflicting on blacks. They starved them to death. They worked them 18 hours a day. They beat them until they bled. When they either show sign of fatigue or they fell sick, they would still get punished for those things. And yet, even after the beating, they would be forced back into the field to work. If, because they weren't fed, they only had very specific time and very specific portion of food that they were allowed to have. And if they were to feel hungry at any point and try to take some of whatever that they had on hand, they would be punished by starvation for a very long time, while they would be forced to work 18 hours. Some slave owners would cut limbs of their slaves just to teach them a lesson and also to instill fears on the other slaves. There was no honeymoon for the slaves. So no reason for anyone to think that slaves just decided to, well, let's just stay slave because that was so good. No chance of that. Now, because of the kind of treatment that were inflicted on slaves, it is very logical to understand why along the way, since the beginning, it's not something that happened at the end. Since the beginning of that period of blacks being chased in Africa, caught, put on a boat, chained and put on a boat to be sold across the world, they were fighting against that. Some of them committed suicide just not to go. Those didn't see slavery because they committed suicide instead of letting themselves being treated the way that they were treated even during transportation. At sea, they would drown themselves. They were chained, but if they found that opportunity to escape, they would escape, throw themselves at sea, and would rather die. Yes, blacks have been fighting against slavery since the beginning. Now, for those who did not have the opportunity, when they got here, they didn't just accept their fate. They too were fighting every single day. They were looking for opportunities to escape, because no individual would ever accept to be put on to be treated the way that blacks were being treated. As such, they tried everything that was possible to escape their predicament. Now, in the beginning, there were a few slaves here, a few slaves there that tried to escape. They hunt them like dogs. If they couldn't capture them, they shoot them down, and that was the end of the story. They had nobody to report to say that we just killed a black. It did not matter then. It does not matter now. There was always a semblance of doing something to make sure that there is a stat that says a white person just killed a black person. Today, a police officer killed an unarmed black man. There is a semblance of justice, and everything goes, well, the way that we already know it would go. We found those officers not guilty. They didn't use excessive force. They were in the right to use weapon and kill an individual who was unarmed. Nothing has changed in America in regards to blacks. War on blacks. Now, in order to understand the rage that blacks who were slaves felt, well, all of them were, slave felt, and why the uprising started really as all the small uprising that happened in the beginning were really pretty benign in a sense, because all of those slaves, the only thing that were of importance to them were to just escape the predicament they were in. Just that. They had no other, they had nothing else in mind. They just wanted to escape slavery. Was it too much to ask? Of course it was, as far as the white slave owners were concerned. Because to them, blacks were slaves and they were supposed to stay slaves. And today we see the same lineage, descendant of slave owners, who continue to be racist and continue the work of their ancestors. Yes, they cannot force the issue and make black slaves anymore, but they continue the work of making certain that there are obstacles put along the way to continue to prevent blacks from advancing. And we'll get to that. We'll talk about that. We have talked about those little details as we go along. Yes, as we move away from the slavery time and start moving into modern time, you will start to see example after example of those type of behavior by those who are racist, who continue to discriminate. And yet, if you were to ask, we have no problem with blacks. Now, before we continue the conversation of the bloody uprising, because what you're going to understand about that particular fact, we already started that. If you watch a few of the previous, and I strongly encourage you to visit the People Branch YouTube channel, where all the previous presentation about this topic, race relation, under war on blacks and race relation, you'll find tons of video already posted on the People Branch YouTube channel. So I strongly encourage you to listen to those, because it will give you kind of a good background as we're going through this process of explaining why racism, discrimination still rampant in America, as to why that is. Now, we mentioned a few uprising, and the past few days we talked about the Stoner Rebellion, which comprised a group of 20 black slaves in Charleston, South Carolina, who decided, 1739, who decided to, escape. They went and stole weapons, stole food, and they were making their way to Florida. Well, in fact, they were making their way out of the predicament they were in, because that was the plan. Those are the uprising we've been talking about that were not organized. Just people who were tired of being treated the way that they were treated and just wanted to get out of the predicament. That's all. They didn't want anything other than being free. But white slave owners wouldn't hear of it. As far as they are concerned, blacks supposed to stay slave. So the Stoner Rebellion, those people did encounter some resistance from white, and in the process of moving from South Carolina to Florida, they kill a few whites in the process. But as they going down that path, they also were increasing in numbers. By the time that they reached Florida, they started at 20. By the time they reached Florida, they grew to 100. But unfortunately, as it was the case almost for all disorganized escape, they did not have a plan. There was no plan. So the plan is simply to escape. So of course, once they were faced with resistance by white slave owners and by authority, they scattered, and it was easier to just get them, round them up, try them, and execute them. And that was the fate of blacks during slavery. They tried to escape, Think about that for just a moment. The wrong was to capture a group of people who did not do anything to anyone, bring them here to slave, but when they try to escape, caught, executed. But whites, especially those who are racist, have this ability of turning the table and say blacks are the criminal, blacks are violent. Now, those were people they were doing wrong to. They were mistreating, inflicting inhuman treatment on, who tried to escape those kind of treatment. And yet, when they got caught, they got executed because, well, they shouldn't have tried to escape slavery. And we have the nerve today to be calling blacks criminal. They violent. Now, you will understand why that is, because there has always been this movement by white slave owners. It was not just a war which inflicted physical casualties on blacks, but the war went beyond physical casualties. Again, I strongly suggest you take a look at the previous presentation, because they do have plenty of detail about not only other type of casualties, but of detail that will give you help following along as to why today racism, discrimination is still rampant in America. And we're not talking about just common folks. We're talking about President of the United States. We're talking about people, leaders, mostly of the Republican Party, as we will show you that racism is mostly concentrated with Republicans. And we will show you why as well. Now, slaves subjected to inhuman treatment. Picture for a moment that was you. You have an opportunity to escape. What would you do? Now, let's look at the second aspect. You escape from someone who captured you, not just capture you and nothing else happened, but capture you and force you to work 18 hours a day, do not feed you, beat you when you feel tired, cut your limb, torture you. You escape that individual. Now, you more or less free, although in reality, when black slaves escaped, if they were still in the South, they were not free because there was nowhere for them to go. No matter which door they would knock at, that would be the end of their freedom. Because the South was, especially if we're talking about the South, every door you knock was white individual who owned slave, who had slave, and they were part of the whole community of slave ownership. So you knock at their door, you most likely already lost your freedom. If not killed instantaneously, you will be cut back and put back to slavery. So if you were in that predicament, I guarantee you, you would do whatever is necessary to stay free until you can get to some place where you don't have to worry about your freedom. And that's what blacks during that period were trying to do. Escape slavery and move north. So because they were disorganized in the beginning, it's obvious that every time that they get caught, they get executed. But the point I try to make with that is the fact that despite the kind of behavior whites had towards black, in the end, they the one who turn around and blame the victim for their predicament. Yes, blacks are criminal. Blacks are violent. And I already started to explain why they feel that way, despite the fact that their behavior was that mass murderers or was that of serial killers. But those labels were never attributed to them, and you will see why that as well. Now, after a number of small uprising, revolts here, revolts there, led to nothing. Because every time that a few blacks decided we're going to make a run for it, and that's all they had, the possibility to make a run for it. It never went further because they got caught, they got executed. Picture that for a moment. White slave owners were mistreating black, who tried to escape the treatment they were getting from white slave owners. But for some reason, escaping slavery was a crime. They get caught, they get executed. Now, you, white, if you are a descendant of white slave owners, you cannot wash your hand and say you have nothing to do with slavery. Slavery is over. Of course, slavery is over. But you are not innocent of the predicament today we have. Because while you weren't there, a couple of things happened. And we will bring more tangible proof to the conversation once we completely leave the slavery aspect behind and start moving into modern time, and you start seeing the bridge between slavery and our time. A bridge between what happened during slavery with both blacks and white, and what we have today between blacks and whites. So that created this problem we have with race relation in America. Now, if you did not hear, or you came late, or you never watched this before, and we've been saying it over and over, there are two groups of whites in the country: those who are racist and discriminate, and those who are not and do not discriminate. Now, no one is born racist, but all men are born ignorant. And this program gears toward providing information to help clear that problem, that especially in the discussion of race relation in America, because there is a disconnect between history and those who are actually racist and practice discrimination. There is a huge disconnect. During the time I was pursuing a degree in journalism, I met quite a few whites whose comments clearly tell me, in fact, it's at that time that it became important to me And I started researching that very topic because I realized that even people who consider themselves educated, they have a college degree, and yet when it comes to this problem of race relation in America, they are completely ignorant. And to my great dismay, because journalism requires that people say certain things when you're studying, and you are taught that you're supposed to research anything that you're going to talk about. And of course, you can give your opinion, but it has to be based on facts. And in the case of this aspect, slavery, race relation, there are plenty of books written that can provide plenty of information before someone even decide where to go in terms of how they feel about this kind of group, that kind of group. And yet, during my time studying journalism, those colleagues of mine were white. They were saying things that really blew my mind. And that triggered, Donald Trump did not trigger this program. For those who have already commented about that as if Donald Trump is behind everything. No, this program has been in the making for quite some time now. Actually, since 2014. Actually, way before that, 2012, 2013. Now, white slave owners wanted at all costs to keep black slaves. And by at all costs, I really mean at all costs. You may remember the Civil War, hundreds of thousands of white who wanted to keep slavery around fought for that and died. So at all costs, they wanted to keep slavery around. And on the other side as well, there were plenty of whites who fought to end slavery. So here is the big divide in the country between this group of whites and that group of whites. And we will discuss about recognizing those who are still racist, who still discriminate, even if they say they're not, because the biggest issue about this interaction between blacks and whites in the country. Because people can say whatever, they can pretend to be whatever, and yet we in the 21st century still talking about racism and discrimination in America. Now, there is a gentleman, and that's what makes, every time we're talking about race relation in America, that's what makes the discussion or even finding a solution so difficult. Because whites, even during slavery, we're not even talking about the Civil War. We're talking about during the time that slaves were escaping the treatment, the inhuman treatment they were subjected to under the white slave owners. There were whites who were putting their neck out, defending the slave, and actually working with the slave to help them escape. Some of them suffered the same consequences as the slave, meaning they were publicly executed. So yes, there is this huge problem in America that groups of whites who understand that it's a human interaction. And then there are another group of whites who feel that, well, blacks shouldn't have the same privilege as whites, because they have in their mind this preconceived idea that that should not be. Now, where did that come from? Now, we're going to talk about that gentleman His name is John Brown. We'll talk about him in the next segment. But suffice to say that in between disorganized uprising and revolt by blacks who wanted to escape slavery, there were also a small group of blacks, you would consider black leaders, who, based on past, on the way things turned out in the past, for as much as they could get part of the story related to them, so they started to understand that it requires a little bit more planning to escape slavery, because their predicament was dire. They were policed by white slave owners, by other white that they employed, who had weapons, who would shoot any black who tried to escape. And now, because of every time that white began to hear little uprising here, little uprising there, white start fearing, oh my God, we have a problem. Now, if you think about it for a second, if you weren't doing anything wrong to blacks, why would you feel afraid of what they may come to do to you? Common sense. First, they went to Africa, chased them like animals, captured them, bring them to do forced labor here, and punish them to a degree just to leave them with enough life not to die. So it made perfect sense that at some point whites in the South start feeling that this is thus the predicament was, it was paranoia, because they know that things started to change. It was no longer just a small group of slaves just feeling that it's enough is enough. It wasn't just one of the things that white slave owners had in the beginning of this whole thing of slavery was the fact that every time, and that's also the reason that they did most of the punishment in public, because what they tried to do, they tried to make a lesson out of slaves who were not obedient. So every time a slave either felt tired, decided, I need a break, the slave owner, white slave owner, would beat that slave publicly, not only for the other slave to see, but would beat the slave until he lost consciousness, so that the other slave could see the kind of punishment that awaits any one of them if they tried. That the kind of individual that today your ancestors, if you're white and you come from the lineage of slave ownership, that they told you was a good man. But the story that they passed to you about the slave, they were violent, they were criminal. But your great grandfather was a very good man. The kind of treatment that individual Joe, your great, 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 great grandfather, inflicted on the slave, there is no room to call that individual a good man. By any definition, he was a monster. But that's not what you learn, because they passed down to you, he was a good man, but it's the slave who were criminal. And by the way, for sake of conversation, that's the kind of individual that I met in the journalism class, the way that they were talking about blacks. It's like they had a good uncle, they had a good whatever, good man. But the slave killed the whole family. That's the information that was passed. No context, nothing. Just tell them that the slave escaping, they could have just escaped. You know, they could have just go their way and leave everybody alone. No, they had to kill the whole John Travis family. That's the story that they passed, and that's the story that was told from one generation to the other. But they never told you, the white descendant of white slave owner, that every time that black who tried to escape get caught, they executed them. They never said that story, because that story, why tell you? No, they told you that, well, there was a group of slaves escaping, they killed the whole John Travis family. That's why you don't have any uncle. And that's how they start shaping the sentiment of whites in the South towards blacks. Because they tell you the story that they wanted to tell you, leaving everything else. So you grew up, well, not you personally, because it's passed from generation to generation. Was told to you by your father, your grandfather, that kind of story was passed down, and that's what you know. That the reason you lost part of your family, because those criminals, those slave, violent people, they killed the whole family. Amazing. So you have that story without the other side, where they executed plenty of slaves before those who killed that whole family managed to do so. So the story is half-baked in order to make you what you are today. A white individual who is racist, whose sentiment towards black is off the chart. Because as far as you're concerned, blacks should just stay in their place. Now, next time we will talk about John Brown, who, as a white individual, saw what was happening to blacks and decided, you know what? Those whites who don't have any soul, those monsters, we need to fight against that, because slavery is wrong. Slavery is bad. A white individual. That's why I keep saying, and I continue to say, that in this country, there are two groups of whites. And it didn't happen yesterday. It was present during slavery. There are plenty of whites who did not have slaves because they knew it was wrong. But those people in the South, that is the irony of the whole thing. Those people in the South, the one that pretend to be Christian, to be religious, those are the same people who inflicted the kind of inhuman treatment on blacks and go to church and pray. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. There is a huge difference between politics and deception. That ought to be said. That ought to be addressed and explained. You see, we've always complained about gridlock in Washington. We, the people, always blame politics for the problem. It's a problem which has plagued the country for decades, century even. For the past few decades, it's become more and more obvious as to the cause of gridlock in Washington. And it's not politics. Well, it's not just politics. Democrat legislators have, for the most part, played politics. Republicans, on the other hand, for the most part, have resorted to deception. And there is a huge, big difference between the two. Now, most politicians are perceived as liars. Or at the very least, they lie every so often about something, anything. Republicans in general have made the practice of a standard, even a standard way of life in politics. Now, that may sound partisanship. So let's use a couple of examples in order to make that point. Just recently, a couple of days ago, Nancy Pelosi had used a very favorable opportunity to play politics. She mentioned that because of the shutdown, that the president should postpone the State of the Union address. Now that's politics. It's someone who sees an opportunity and decide, well, how can I use that opportunity and get at that individual, the other side, so to speak. That's what politics is. Now, I'm not here to debate whether it's right or wrong, whether you like it or not. That's not even the point. That's politics. That's how politics play someone out with the other side. It's kind of almost a chess game. Now, that's politics. Now, let's take a look at an example of Republican. Republican introduced the $1.5 trillion tax cut. Now, you can say it's, well, they frame it as politics. That's why Democrats were against it. But it wasn't politics. And the reason we know that is because the $1.5 trillion that they claim was a tax cut, 1.3 out of that went to wealthy individual and large corporation. But when they presented it to us, they say it was a tax cut for the people. Now, if you take 85 to 90% of that money and give to wealthy individual and large corporation, it's not a tax cut for the people. Now, granted, we got 0.2 out of that. Now, some people, especially Republicans, felt, oh, this is not bad. At least we got something. But this is where the deception comes. Because 0.2 is what we, the people, are getting, right? But we are responsible for the whole 1.5. But Republicans didn't say that. Didn't tell us that. They simply frame it as we're getting a tax cut. Now, those individuals who receive $60 or $50 extra on their paycheck, they're like, yippee, we got tax cut. Well, actually, you didn't get anything because two things that Republicans didn't tell you, that money, that extra money that you see on your paycheck is not permanent. And on top of that, you have to return it along with more because, as I mentioned, we only get 0.2, but we're responsible for the whole 1.5. That's deception, not politics. Because when they were selling it to us, they didn't say, we're only going to give you 0.2, but guess what? You're going to have to pay back the whole 1.5. And the reason they wouldn't do that is because they know it would not be acceptable. We would not like it. So Republicans resort to deception. There is a big difference between politics and deception. The question I always ask myself, why do Republican legislators, elected officials, time and again resort to deception? We'll get to that in a minute. Now, it is easy to disagree with Democrats on position on many issues, which is okay, and that's exactly what I was saying. The point is not to get you to agree with Democrats. There are plenty of things Democrats do, be it out of principle or naivete. They try to present to the constituent the issue and take a position. Now, in other words, you may like it, you may not like it. They may not care, but they present it to you. Republicans, on the other hand, have always taken the position to lying, to deceiving the constituent. But what makes Republican legislators and elected officials, what get them to be emboldened and, mind you, very successful, is because Republican constituents are gullible and naive. And I don't say that as a matter of trying to insult, but because Republican legislators, they rely very heavily on the fact that whatever they say to their constituent, the constituent will just accept it and go along with it. And we've seen it, we've witnessed it. In fact, Republican constituents do not just believe the lie that fed to them, they've internalized it to the point that it becomes a genuine belief on their part. Now, to keep millions of people in ignorance is a sure path to destroying democracy in any country. It doesn't matter whether it's here, the United States of America, or any country. If you keep feeding the constituent, the resident, the lies, you keep deceiving them, you are actually destroying the system of democracy that the country has. Now, despite claiming some elusive core values, Republican leaders have taken the most expedient path to securing their political career over the well-being of the country. Now, remember the 2016 presidential election? Donald Trump went to a group of people in Pennsylvania, a group of individuals who were supporting him to his rally, and he said to them, I will bring manufacture back. Now, Donald Trump knew that he was lying to those people, but he said it anyway because he adopted the Republican way of life. Now, listen to this. Hillary Clinton, on the other hand, what she did, whether again out of naivete or because Democrat, as I mentioned before, tried to present the actual possibility to the same group of people, the same town. What Hillary Clinton suggested was, we're going to try, if I'm elected president, we're going to try to retrain people so that they can get other jobs, because those manufactured jobs, they're gone and they're not coming back. What a stark contrast between Democrat and Republican. Republican lie to their constituent, to their audience, in order to get their vote. Now, again, I'm not here to discuss what's right, what's not right, what's good, what's not good, whether you should like the way Democrats do business or not, whether you should like Democrat for the policy or whatever. This is not the point. It's only to show you that the Republican legislators, elected officials, they resort to deception, to lies, in order to make a point, to pursue an agenda. And the reason they continue to do so is because they also rely on the fact that the constituent would simply take their lies as truth. And we've seen that. We've seen constituent arguing a lie. And we know that because those same individuals continue to vote those same legislators, those same congressmen, those same senators, those same governors, those same mayors, they continue to vote them back in office. So we know they are gullible and they are naive. Now, for sake of conversation, it would not be a problem that you have a group of people who simply are naive enough to continue to believe the lies that are fed to them by their politician, by their representative. It would not be a problem. Now, the reason it is a problem is because ignorance is the biggest threat to any democracy. Oh yes, as the Republican legislators, the Republican elected official continue to feed their constituent lies, continue to get them on the wrong path, you start having a very large group of people in the country who are so dummified by the kind of information that are fed to them, it becomes almost impossible for those two people to have a conversation and seek a compromise, because there is a group that is completely deprived of knowledge and facts, and there is another group that's trying to reason, to use logic, to use facts in order to bring a solution to a problem. How do you do that? You cannot possibly solve problem in the country when you have this issue. It is a major issue in the country. But what is most troubling is the fact that those individual legislators, elected officials, Republican legislators and elected officials, they know better. They know what they're doing is wrong. They know they're lying to their constituent. How can I possibly know that? Example. When Obama was president and the Healthcare Act was presented as a way to help people who could not afford healthcare, well, aka Obamacare, for some of you, that's what you know Healthcare Act under as Obamacare. Now, Republicans across all spectrum were up in arms telling their constituent how bad Obamacare was. They came up with all kind of explanation as to, gee, don't let that happen to our country because this is so bad. It's gonna kill jobs. It's gonna kill your parents. They went overboard. And that was deception, not politics. Deception. Now, there was an argument to be made. Anyone can make an argument if you feel or you oppose a piece of legislation, whatever the reason is, you can bring your argument forth. And of course, you can bring an alternative forth. That's what people in politics do, because you have a concern for the country. Maybe you have a different way of solving that problem. So someone suggested this, then you come and suggested that and present your argument as to why your solution is better. That's politics. But when you don't have anything to present to people, and at the same time, you are lying to the constituent about the solution that's proposed, that's not politics. That is deception. And Republican legislators, your representative, resort to that over and over and over again because they don't have anything better to present to you. So they resort to deception. But what makes the situation even dire is the fact that you, the constituent, believe them. So you are being dummified by your representative. Now, the reason we know that they were lying to you about Obamacare is because during the 2018 midterm, pushed to a corner, back against the wall, what did they say? Now, all of a sudden, they want to protect you against the idea of being denied coverage for pre-existing condition. Well, how about that? They want to make sure that your children who are less than 26 years old would still be covered under your plan. How about that? Those are important, actually major part of Obamacare. The very healthcare act that those Republicans told you were so bad they wanted to repeal it and kill it. We know that Republican legislators, representatives, they deal exclusively on deception. They don't have anything better to offer. They don't have any alternative. They cannot argue against the plan that they say is bad, so they deceive their constituent. It's bad. How bad is it? How can it be so bad? Tell me why it's so bad. Oh, it's a death panel. And hysteria. Obamacare is death panel. It's going to kill grandma. I mean, come on. But what makes it bad, it's not just the representative that's telling you the story, but it's the fact that Republican constituents simply are gullible and naive and believe all those lies, all those deception. And because Republican representative know that their constituents are so gullible and so naive, they can tell them anything and they will accept anything that they tell them. This is the problem with our country. Because Republicans and Democrats, they're not that far apart on any issue. And that's the scary part for Republican representatives, because they see that everything that Democrats come up with, they like, oh, we like that, but we cannot say we like that, otherwise we don't have anything to argue against. So they lie to you. So Donald Trump is just a straw man, as I mentioned before. Donald Trump is not smart enough to cause any of the problem that we see in this country. Yes, he's the face. You know, we always need a man, someone to crucify. And who is best? And Donald Trump seems to be dumb enough to offer himself in sacrifice. Of course, he doesn't know that, but that's the state of affairs. Democrats point to Donald Trump as being the guy that's destroying the country. And don't get me wrong, Donald Trump has done a lot of bad things. I'm not arguing to defend Donald Trump here. But Donald Trump could not have inflicted to the country the kind of damage that's been done before Donald Trump was even fathomed the idea of bidding for the presidency of the United States. Republicans have been doing the damage that I just mentioned. Donald Trump wasn't in the picture when they were arguing against Obamacare. It's bad, it's death panel, it's this, it's that. And yet there was no alternative proposed. So Donald Trump is just a straw man. Republican representatives in Washington have been helping destroying the very fabric of the country, the very fabric of our society. And Donald Trump happened to be a good person to put there as for everybody to throw doubt at, because he's a dummy. So everybody is pointing to him. Both Republicans love the idea that we cannot see them because they're hiding behind Donald Trump. But Republican representative, elected officials are responsible for the problem that we have been coping with in this country. They have been working steadily, eroding our democracy. And we see today that whether it's here in the country or outside the country, most observers know that you can go to people, leaders in the Republican Party, and you get a deal. They tried Democrat, but they didn't get anywhere. Now, you can hate Democrats all you want, you can bash Democrats all you want, but there is something to say about a party that claims to have core values, and yet anyone can come with flashing some money and proposing, promising to get you to keep your job, to keep your position, and give you some money in the process. And Republican would say, why not? That's why today Republicans are embroiled in the whole Russia thing. It's not just Donald Trump. Don't be naive thinking Donald Trump is alone in this. Donald Trump is a crooked businessman. All his life, that's all he has done. He has never done anything that's legal, that's legitimate. That's not just me saying. The documents are there to prove my point. Anything that Donald Trump has done in his private life has been illegitimate, illegal. He has gotten away with it because, of course, he had enough money to pay different people to cover all that up. So, me personally, I never expected, and I wrote extensively about that, I never expected Donald Trump to be any different than what he was before. But again, Donald Trump is a crooked businessman. He's no smart man. So what you see happening to the United States of America is the work of the Republican Party, the leaders, those people we call leaders. You see the shutdown that everybody is looking at Trump? Yes, Trump may have caused it, But look towards Mitch McConnell. The reason that the framers of the Constitution set the system that way is to give a way out of predicament like this. Donald Trump, even if Donald Trump were to want the shutdown to continue, Mitch McConnell bring this whole matter to a vote and the shutdown is over. There are enough Republicans that would vote to override any veto by the president. So the blaming of the president is, as I mentioned, just a straw man. The problem is the Republican leaders, the Republican Party. So we're giving too much credit to Donald Trump. The Republican leaders have been dealing exclusively, have been trading exclusively on deception. They're not playing politics. The expression playing politics cannot be attributed to Republicans because they do not play politics. Republicans use deception to do anything and everything that they try to do. Of course, they try to frame it as if it's politics. It's not politics, folks. It's deception. Look at everything that Republicans in Washington have done and see what they have done and tell me whether you see that as politics. It's pure deception. And of course, they rely on the gullibility, on the naiveness of their constituent to continue to back them up so that they can continue to have a job in Washington. In 1996, a small network by the name of Fox News was launched with just 17 million viewers. Today, with over 100 million people watching regularly, Fox has become the greatest threat to our democracy, constantly bombarding the airwaves with false information, distortion of facts, and outright lies, presenting to its audience as news. Fox has created an army of blissful ignorance. According to a recent survey, 82% of Fox viewers are ignorant of facts and the truth. To keep millions of people in ignorance not only prevents democracy from flourishing, but it also clears the path to authoritarianism, to dictatorship. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Let me finish by saying that democracy cannot survive in an environment where truth and facts do not matter. At Fox, truth and facts do not matter. Indeed, democracy in America is in jeopardy. It is a crisis the country can no longer ignore. I do thank you to have spent the time, to have taken some time to spend it with me. And I do appreciate that. And keep in mind that you are contributing as part of the solution. If you have questions, criticism, suggestion, do not hesitate to contact us. And if you have a suggestion about any topic you would like us to research and discuss here on the Fourth Branch program, please do contact us and we will gladly research and talk about those issues. In the meantime, I hope you have a wonderful afternoon and join me again tomorrow at 10:30 a.m. when we continue our conversation with race relation in America. Hi, I am MD, host of the Fourth Branch program. War on Blacks is a new topic added to the Fourth Branch programming in order to discuss the intricacies, the complexities of race relations in America. The goal is threefold. 1. To bring attention to the various forms of prejudice, discriminations, and racism in the country. 2. To expose the undeniable presence of such in every aspect of life and every corner of our society. 3. To extricate us all from the ignorance, the indifference, or the complicity. The ultimate objective is to make the discussions of those issues, racism, prejudice, discrimination, a normal part of our lives. Then, and only then, will we, as a society, be able to eradicate the problem. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Nothing in all the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity." Abraham Joshua Heschel exclaimed, "Racism is man's gravest threat to man, the maximum of hatred for the minimum of reason." Join me in the journey to restore equality. Or would you please get out of the way? Thank you. Fourth Branch Podcast is brought to you in collaboration with the People Branch publication, which can be found on the People Branch website, located at peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org. That's peoplebranch.org website, in which you will find a number of very interesting articles. My name is Mike Duchesne, MD for short. I hope you have a great afternoon or a great evening, whichever it happens to be. Hopefully you can join me again next time for another interesting episode of this podcast. That was the Fourth Branch, live from New York. Good day.